Man, oh man, oh man, A Quiet Place Part 2 was such a... Sorry, A Quiet Place Part 2 was such a good film. It was a really good film. This is my review of A Quiet Place Part 2, and yes, it may contain spoilers. The whole concept of these films where there's these creatures, these monsters, where they hunt anything that makes a noise, so you gotta be really quiet, and I'm not the biggest fan of horror films, I must admit. I really hate them, but there is something about both these films. I watched the first one in cinema and I watched the second one in cinema after we waited a really long time for it, and both of them were just so incredible, and it's definitely like a big screen experience. You need that surround sound, you need that cinema feel when watching these films because it's very tense. And with any first good film and they announce that they're going to make a sequel, you are really worried that they're just going to ruin something great, but this film doesn't disappoint. This film is really good and I can't decide if it's better than the first. They're both on the same level. A Quiet Place Part 2 expands on from what we learned in the first film. So at the end of the first film they discover how to kill these creatures, and the second film expands on that, following that kind of plot point. A Quiet Place Part 2 gives us more context. It expands on the world created in the first film. In the first film it just focuses on that one family, whereas in the second film it expands the wider world. We see more people, we see how other people are dealing with these creatures, and we even get a little prequel scene towards the beginning where we see John Krasinski again, which is really cool, and we also get some context of where these monsters come from. They came from outer space, so there's some alien type creatures, and that's kind of only the origins we get of the monsters. We also learn that they can't swim, and I like how they don't over explain how the monsters work, because that's part of the fear of the unknown, not knowing where they came from, why they're here, how they work. That being said, you do see the monsters more often in this film, whereas in the first film the suspense pretty much came from, like, you know they're there but you can't really see them there, but in the second one they're literally just jumping out from everywhere, and there is still a lot of jump scares. As this film expands on the world, at one point you are following 3 different stories, but they don't feel disjointed and they do all still feel connected. So one of the stories you follow is the boy Marcus, who is played by Jupe, where he's looking after the baby. Another small story is the mum, who's played by Emily Blunt. And then the final story, which is pretty much the main story, the main part of the film, there's a new character called Emmett, who's played by Cillian Murphy, and he's one of their old friends, and it's him with the daughter Regan, who's played by Millicent Simmonds, and she was incredible in this. In this film, her character and her brother kind of have more of a forefront compared to the first film, where it was more of a focus on the parents trying to save their family, trying to give them as much of a life as they could given the situation, whereas in this film it's kind of them two like growing into themselves, kind of taking on more of a leady, very much badass role like the mum Emily Blunt in the first film, because they're kind of like the next generation of kids to step up and fight back, fight the monsters. I'll talk about the children a little bit later. So the main story with Emmett and Regan kind of resembles The Last of Us, where they kind of take on like Joel and Ellie relationship vibes. And is it just me, but the monsters in A Quiet Place remind me of a crossbreed between the Demogorgons in Stranger Things and then the Clickers from The Last of Us. Anyway, in this film, Millicent Simmonds' character Regan steps into the limelight, and rightly so. She did an incredible job, and it does make sense. In the first film, she was the person who discovered the monster's weakness, so it makes sense that she's the person to like expand that knowledge, expand that reach of how to destroy the monsters. And there is a very touching and emotional moment where Cillian Murphy's character Emmett tells her that she's right, he's not like her dad, she is, and yes, that was pretty moving. In the first film, she does want to be more like him and be seen by him, and by the end of the film he sacrifices himself to save her and her brother. And so in this film, A Quiet Place Part 2, she wants that death to mean something and she wants to be more like him, and by the end of the film she does feel more like him. Now I want to get back to the children, and I want to talk about their character growth as well as the editing in this film. How this film is split into 2 stories and then edited is done really well. You don't lose the tension between scenes, so when one person is feeling threat and danger and then it slips into like a different perspective and they're feeling the threat and danger, it moves like seamlessly between these scenes. And towards the end there's also a lot of mirroring between what the characters are dealing with, and that brings me to the character development and growth of the children. In both films, Jupe's character Marcus, the boy, is kind of wimpy and scared of everything, and he doesn't really want to do anything, but by the end of the film he becomes the person his mum always knew he could be, where he protects and saves them from a monster attack, which is also paralleled by the scene where Millicent Simmonds' character Regan saves her and Emmett from a monster attack. And how it's edited together, it seamlessly goes from each like monster kill, and it's really cool. And like I said earlier, they both go all badass Emily Blunt on the monsters.
People worth saving.
And I don't know how I haven't mentioned this yet, but just like the first film, the sound design is incredible, especially when it's from Regan's perspective, as she's deaf, and so you experience the world how she experiences it, and those are the most tense heavy scenes where it's completely silent and you don't know what's about to happen, and that's when you're holding your breath. And it's just incredible. I really like this film. I think it was a perfect sequel, and how it ends where the family is separated sets it up for a third film, and I think there is going to be a third film, though I don't think John Krasinski is directing it. And I really liked how this second film expanded on the world they created in the first film without taking away anything that was developed in it, so I hope they continue that with the third film. I don't know which film is better. I think both parts are really good, and I definitely recommend watching this film, especially watching it in a big screen cinema, because there are some films that just need to be seen in a cinema, and this is one of those films. That concludes my review of A Quiet Place Part 2. If you like this video, please leave it a like and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. Bye!